My ex-husband once told me he didn't want to spend the rest of his life taking care of a sick wife. 3 years later, he walked into my office asking for a job. He had no idea I owned the company. And I don't think he expected to see me sitting behind the CEO's desk. My name is Grace Carter, and this is how it happened. 3 years ago, I was 29 years old. Life wasn't perfect, but I had everything I thought I needed. I had been married to Daniel Brooks for a little over 3 years, although we'd been together since our early 20s. We rented a small house outside Seattle, argued over what to watch on Netflix, made pancakes every Sunday morning, and spent countless evenings talking about buying our first home. We even had names picked out for future children. I truly believed Daniel and I would grow old together. He wasn't just my husband. He was my best friend. Or at least, I thought he was. Everyone loved Daniel. He had a way of making people laugh without trying too hard. He remembered birthdays, helped neighbors carry groceries, and never missed a chance to hold the door open for strangers. People constantly told me how lucky I was. "You found one of the good ones," my sister used to say. I believed her. I believed all of them. If anyone had asked me whether Daniel would stand beside me through the hardest moment of my life, I wouldn't have hesitated for a second. Unfortunately, life has a way of showing you who people really are. Sometimes it just waits until you need them the most. It started with exhaustion. Not the kind that disappears after a good night's sleep. This was different. Every afternoon, I felt like I'd already worked 3 straight days without resting. I'd come home from work, sit on the couch for just 5 minutes, and wake up 2 hours later. Daniel laughed about it. "You're turning into my grandmother," he'd joke. I'd laugh too. Neither of us thought anything was seriously wrong. Then my hands started shaking. Coffee mugs slipped through my fingers. I dropped plates. Walking upstairs suddenly felt like climbing a mountain. One morning, I nearly fell asleep while driving to work. That was the moment I finally made an appointment with my doctor. The first doctor blamed stress. The second suggested vitamin deficiencies. The third ordered more blood tests. Weeks turned into months. Instead of getting answers, I just kept getting worse. For a while, I convinced myself it was nothing serious. Work had been busy. I'd been sleeping poorly. Maybe I just needed a vacation. That's what I kept telling myself. Then one Saturday morning, I was making breakfast when everything suddenly went black. One second, I was standing at the stove. The next, I woke up on the kitchen floor. Daniel was kneeling beside me, calling my name while holding his phone. An ambulance was already on the way. That day marked the beginning of weeks filled with hospitals, blood tests, scans, and appointments with specialists. Every visit seemed to end the same way. More questions. More waiting. More uncertainty. Finally, one afternoon, a specialist walked into the room carrying a thick medical file. He pulled up a chair and looked directly at me. "Grace, we've found the cause of your symptoms." I instinctively reached for Daniel's hand. He squeezed it. At that moment, I believed we were about to face whatever came next together. The doctor explained that I had developed a serious autoimmune disease. It wasn't terminal. It wasn't contagious. And with the right treatment, medication, and regular monitoring, I could still live a long and fulfilling life. The word that echoed in my mind wasn't disease. It was chronic. Something I would have to live with. Not something I would simply recover from. The drive home was almost completely silent. I stared out the window while Daniel kept both hands on the steering wheel. Neither of us knew what to say. That evening, after I'd cried for what felt like hours, I finally looked at him. "Do you think we'll be okay?" He hesitated. "We'll manage." It wasn't exactly comforting, but it was enough to give me hope. At least for a little while. The medication wasn't easy. Some mornings my joints hurt so much that getting out of bed took several minutes. Other days I felt exhausted before noon. I hated asking for help. Daniel seemed to hate hearing me ask. If I needed him to stop by the pharmacy after work, he'd sigh. If I was too tired to cook dinner, he'd complain about spending money on takeout. When I canceled dinner with friends because I wasn't feeling well, he'd mutter, "You're always tired lately." I kept making excuses for him. This is hard for both of us. He's just overwhelmed. He'll adjust. But little by little, I started realizing something. The man I married wasn't disappearing because of my illness. My illness was simply revealing the man he'd always been. I just hadn't seen him before. And before long, he would say something that I'd never be able to forget. It happened on a Thursday evening. I'd gone upstairs to lie down after another exhausting day. The medication had finally started helping, but it also left me drained. Some days, all I wanted was 30 minutes of quiet before making dinner. I thought Daniel was downstairs watching TV. Instead, he was on the phone. At first, I wasn't trying to listen. But then I heard my name. I stopped at the top of the stairs. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," he said. There was a pause. "No, she's not dying." Another pause. "It's just, everything revolves around her now." I felt my stomach tighten. Then he said the sentence that stayed with me for years. "I didn't get married to become someone's caregiver." I couldn't move. "I wanted a wife," he continued, "not someone who's sick all the time." Whoever was on the other end of the call said something I couldn't hear. Daniel sighed. "I know it sounds bad, but I'm only 29. I don't want this to be the rest of my life." I quietly walked back into the bedroom before he could see me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I wasn't crying. Not yet. I think part of me had already accepted the truth before my heart was ready to. That night, he acted as though nothing had happened. He asked what I wanted for dinner. He showed me a funny video. He kissed me goodnight. And I lay there wondering how someone could pretend everything was normal after saying something like that. A week later, I got my answer. Daniel came home from work carrying a bottle of wine. He poured himself a glass and sat across from me at the kitchen table. His face was calm. Too calm. "Grace," he said quietly, "we need to talk." The moment those words left his mouth, I knew. I've been thinking about this for a while. I didn't say anything. I don't think I can do this anymore. I looked at him in disbelief. "What exactly can't you do?" He took a deep breath. "Our marriage." The room felt impossibly quiet. "So, you're leaving me because I got sick?" He immediately shook his head. "No, that's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" He rubbed his forehead before answering. "I'm saying this isn't the life I wanted." I stared at him. "I didn't choose this either." "I know. But it changes everything." He looked me straight in the eyes. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life taking care of a sick wife." Those words hurt more than the diagnosis ever had. I wish I could tell you I fought for my marriage. I didn't. Not because I didn't love Daniel. Because the moment he said those words, I realized I was the only one who had been fighting for us. I looked at him for a long time. Then I quietly asked, "So, when did you stop loving me?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he sighed. "I don't think I stopped loving you." "Then why are you leaving?" He looked down at his glass. "Because love isn't always enough." I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind him of our wedding vows. I wanted to ask him what would have happened if our roles had been reversed. But deep down, I already knew none of it would matter. His decision had been made long before this conversation. Within 2 weeks, he moved out. A month later, we signed the divorce papers. There wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle. There wasn't much to divide. We rented our house. Our savings were modest. We split the furniture, closed our joint account, and quietly walked away from the life we'd built together. Some friends stood by me. Others surprised me. I understand why Daniel left, one mutual friend admitted over coffee. Taking care of someone with a chronic illness isn't easy. I never called her again. What hurt wasn't that people agreed with him. It was how quickly they accepted that loyalty had limits. For a while, I blamed myself. Maybe I had become difficult to live with. Maybe I had asked for too much. Maybe he would have stayed if I hadn't gotten sick. My therapist listened patiently while I poured out every guilty thought I had. Then she asked one simple question. "If Daniel had been the one diagnosed instead of you, would you have left?" The answer came instantly. "Never." She smiled softly. "Then stop holding yourself responsible for someone else's choice." That sentence changed something inside me. For the first time since the divorce, I stopped asking why Daniel had left. Instead, I started asking what I wanted my life to look like without him. I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life feeling sorry for myself. If I had to build a new future, I'd build one that belonged to me. Starting over at 29 wasn't easy. For the first few months after the divorce, I focused on the basics. Getting healthy, showing up to work, keeping my doctor's appointments, trying to believe that my life wasn't over. Slowly, my treatment started working. The flare-ups became less frequent. I still had difficult days, but they no longer controlled every moment of my life. One afternoon, during a therapy session, my therapist asked me something I'd never really considered. What did you want before you built your life around Daniel? I opened my mouth and realized I didn't have an answer. For years, every goal I'd had included him. Buying a house, starting a family, growing old together. I'd forgotten to dream for myself. That question stayed with me for weeks. Then one evening, while helping a small local business with a marketing problem at work, I realized something. I loved solving business challenges. I loved building brands. I loved helping companies grow. The work energized me in a way nothing else had for years. So I started learning everything I could. Every evening after work, I took online business courses. I read books about leadership, finance, and entrepreneurship. Weekends became study sessions instead of recovery days. It was exhausting. But for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt excited about the future. Almost a year after my divorce, an opportunity appeared. A small marketing agency in downtown Seattle was struggling. The owner wanted to retire. Most of their clients had already left, and several employees were looking for new jobs. Almost everyone told me to stay away. The company's finished. It's a money pit. You'll lose everything. Maybe they were right. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wasn't buying what the company was. I was buying what it could become. After weeks of planning, I emptied most of my savings, qualified for a small business loan, and signed the papers. The first day I unlocked the office, there were only 4 employees waiting inside. They looked nervous. Honestly. So was I. I smiled anyway. I know things have been uncertain, I told them. But if you're willing to give me a chance, I promise I'll give you everything I've got. That morning, none of us knew it. But we weren't just rebuilding a business. We were rebuilding our lives. The first 6 months were brutal. There were days when I questioned every decision I'd made. Some clients canceled their contracts before I even had the chance to meet them. Others had completely lost confidence in the agency after years of poor management. Money was tight. There were weeks when I paid my employees first and wondered whether I'd have enough left to pay myself. But I had made a promise the day I bought the company. No one on my team would ever feel abandoned the way I had. One of the first people I hired was Olivia, a graphic designer with incredible talent who had been laid off from her previous job. Then came Marcus, a copywriter who lacked confidence, but wrote some of the best marketing campaigns I'd ever read. A few months later, Ethan joined us as a project manager after leaving a company where employees were treated like numbers instead of people. Little by little, our team started to grow. We weren't the biggest agency in Seattle. We didn't have the largest budget. What we had was trust. We answered our clients' calls. We admitted our mistakes. We delivered what we promised. That alone made us different. Within the first year, we had doubled our client list. By the second year, we had moved into a much larger office downtown. Seeing our logo on the front of that building was one of the proudest moments of my life. Not because it meant I'd become successful, because it reminded me how far I'd come. 3 years earlier, I had been sitting in a doctor's office wondering if my life was falling apart. Now I was signing contracts, interviewing new employees, and leading a company filled with people who believed in one another. My illness was still part of my life. There were still doctor's appointments. There were still mornings when my body reminded me to slow down. But it no longer defined who I was. Ironically, I felt healthier after my divorce than I had during the final year of my marriage. I hadn't realized how much stress had been making my condition worse. Every now and then, mutual friends mentioned Daniel. Apparently, he'd changed jobs more than once. One company had downsized. Another had gone through restructuring. Nothing catastrophic had happened to him. His life had simply never become what he'd imagined. Whenever someone mentioned his name, I politely changed the subject. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I had something far more valuable. Peace. At least. That's what I believed until one rainy Tuesday morning. Olivia knocked gently on my office door. Grace, HR just finished reviewing the applications for the senior project manager position. Great, I said. Anyone promising? She handed me the folder with a smile. There are 3 finalists. I think you'll want to meet all of them. I thanked her, opened the folder, and looked at the first resume. The moment I read the name, my heart skipped a beat. Daniel Brooks. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. 3 years after walking away because he didn't want to spend the rest of his life with a sick wife. My ex-husband had just applied for a job at my company. He had absolutely no idea who owned it. I read Daniel's resume 3 times before setting it back on my desk. His qualifications were solid. Years of experience. Strong references. Management positions at recognizable companies. If I had never met the man behind the paper, I probably would have been impressed. But a resume only tells you where someone has worked. It doesn't tell you who they become when life gets difficult. A few minutes later, Olivia came back into my office. So, she asked, "What do you think?" I closed the folder. "How did he do in the first interview?" She glanced at her notes. "Honestly, pretty well. He communicates well. He's organized, and everyone on the panel liked him." She paused before adding, "We think he'd fit the role." I nodded slowly. "Then let's keep the process fair." She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Daniel had no idea Carter Creative belonged to me. When we divorced, the company didn't exist. There was no website back then. No office. No employees. No reason for him to connect my name to the business. Part of me considered canceling the interview. It would have been easy. No explanation. Just another rejection email. He would never know. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't who I wanted to be. I hadn't spent 3 years rebuilding my life just to run away from one uncomfortable conversation. If I truly believed I'd moved on, then this was my chance to prove it. The following morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else. I made myself a cup of coffee, reviewed the day's schedule, and tried to calm the strange mix of emotions I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't nervous about seeing Daniel. I was curious. Would he recognize me immediately? Would he apologize? Would he pretend we'd never been married? Or would he simply turn around and leave? At exactly 10 o'clock, my receptionist called. "Grace, your 10 o'clock interview is here." I took one deep breath. "Send him in." A few seconds later, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." The door opened. Daniel stepped inside wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather portfolio. At first, he smiled the polite smile every job candidate wears. Then he looked up. His expression froze. The smile disappeared. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. "Grace." His voice was barely above a whisper. I smiled politely. "Good morning, Daniel." He looked around the office as if trying to convince himself he had walked into the wrong room. Then his eyes landed on the company logo behind my desk. Finally, he looked back at me. "You own this company?" "I do." The shock on his face said everything. Daniel slowly took the seat across from my desk, but he never stopped looking at me. I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "You're here for a job interview." He let out a nervous laugh. "I guess I am." For a moment, it almost felt like we were 2 strangers meeting for the first time. Then reality settled back into the room. Daniel looked around my office one more time. "I heard from someone that you'd started a business," he said. "I just never imagined it would become this. It took a lot of work." "I'm sure it did." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Grace." "I'm sorry." I didn't interrupt him. "I've wanted to apologize for a long time. I handled everything the worst way possible. I was selfish. I was scared. And instead of standing beside you, I walked away." For the first time in years, I believed every word he said. Not because he wanted something from me. Because life had finally given him enough time to understand what he'd done. "I can't change the past," he continued. "But if I could go back, I'd make a different choice." I smiled politely. "Maybe you would." He lowered his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. I already did. He looked surprised. You did? I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you deserved it. Because I deserved peace. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Daniel asked the question we both knew was coming. So, do I still have a chance at this job? I opened his resume one last time before closing it again. Daniel, you're qualified. You have experience. You interview well. But the position isn't only about experience. He nodded quietly. What matters most to me is character. He didn't argue. He simply listened. When people join this company, they become part of a team. And when someone on that team is struggling, we don't leave them behind. The room fell completely silent. Daniel swallowed hard. I understand. I don't think you'd be the right fit here. For just a second, disappointment crossed his face. Then he stood up. There was no anger, no excuses, no attempt to change my mind. He simply extended his hand. I'm proud of you, Grace. I stood and shook it. Thank you. He gave me a small smile before walking toward the door. Just before leaving, he stopped. You were right. I frowned slightly. About what? The person who truly loved the other one. It was you. Then he walked out. I watched the door close behind him. 3 years earlier, I thought Daniel leaving had destroyed my life. Now I understood the truth. The day he walked away wasn't the day I lost everything. It was the day I finally stopped building my future around someone else's love. People think revenge is about making someone suffer. It isn't. The greatest victory is becoming someone who no longer needs an apology, an explanation, or another chance. Daniel came looking for a new beginning. I had already found mine.